Hey guys, welcome back to Time Under Tension. And this week we are capping off our series on transitions, which has been perfect timing considering our personal transition that we talked about a little bit last week with the big move. And now, was that last week? When did we move?
It'll be 2 weeks on Thursday.
Okay, great. So
So
2 weeks
yeah,
ago today we left.
right,
And we've had about that amount of time to settle in. So it's
right.
been pretty crazy to think so much has happened in just 2 weeks.
hmm
2 weeks.
hmm
But I would say one of the things I want to celebrate is this amazing creation. We put this bed together today with actual instructions and our actual new toolbox. So we're pretty much officially homemakers now.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about this last week for you since we talked and maybe what you've learned in your personal experience of this transition and how you've been maybe struggling and then reframing that and maybe even thriving in it. Where are you at now?
Yeah, I talk about the tools book a lot, and there's two of them. There's the tools, and the second one is called Coming Alive. And I just finished Coming Alive today, and I read it every morning when I do my cardio. And that has honestly been this gateway for me to really address my current mindset and the place in which I was in. I talked about it on the last podcast episode, but I was struggling a little bit with the transition internally and adjusting to the newness of opportunities here. And what the tools book has coming alive, I should be clear. The coming alive book that I'm reading, it referenced in the section I was reading about truth, beauty, and goodness, and how when we are engaging with the world, our lens on the world really matters, and our lens on obstacles really matter in regards to the way in which we approach them, but also how we are internally digesting newness and change and transition. So for me, being in a place of struggling a little bit from a reflection standpoint. I came into this new place, and because it was so new, I was feeling a little bit of dissonance internally. And what that caused me to do in my just natural thinking was to worry that I was being disobedient to God, that I made the wrong decision, that like stuck in worry, really stuck in my cardio patterns, excessive exercise to feel a little bit more grounded. It was causing more tension than this new perspective that the book brings is newness and your lens on the world. Each obstacle or opportunity of transition and growth is really this experience of allowing this old life, this old pattern to die and to really come in to make room for the new and be able to see each obstacle as a gift from God, as a gift from the universe, and prioritizing the fact that the universe is bringing you something and not prioritizing your familiarity or um, old patterns of behavior or worry and stress. It's more like, all right, I had to let that old life die, and now that I've brought myself into this new experience, this new place, it's not about reflecting on the past. It's about seeing this transition as an open door instead of a closed door. What can I make of this new opportunity? What can I find in my immediate environment that's inspiring me to grow? And where are the opportunities placed in front of me for me to expand myself and grow versus worrying that I'm getting stuck? So it was like a trust and faith shift in my mindset and my lens on the world being more focused on the universe is working for me instead of I'm in this new place. I don't necessarily feel too good. Now I'm stressed and I'm worried and I'm hoping I'm not being disobedient. It's like I completely transformed my lens. I know that was a roundabout answer, but that's really what's changed my overall ability to feel joy and hope and gratitude for the transition and the newness and the growth that I'm enduring now.
How were you seeing it initially when you were struggling with it more and you found yourself like leaning into old coping patterns? How are you defining the transition?
The way I would phrase it was I was relying on my senses. I was relying on my feelings and my thoughts. So I wasn't stepping outside of them and seeing the other side. Like the what if was negative instead of the what if being positive. So what I was seeing was a lot of, like we talked about on previous episodes, when we have something that's set in our mind with thoughts and we're finding evidence for that thought, that's what was happening. Was I was thinking I was not being obedient, or I made the wrong decision. I was stuck in worry and going back because I was seeing it as, well, what if this negative thing instead of this what if positive? Like, well, what if this is a completely new clean slate for me to be able to meet new people and use my voice differently instead of, well, I don't know anybody here, so how am I going to go about getting new clients here? Like I knew way more people back in North Carolina versus like coming, things like that. So the way I was seeing it was so much like I'm in my thoughts, I'm in my feelings, and I'm finding evidence to prove those things versus now my lens is like everything around me is beautiful and I should love everything around me. So how can I create in this space? Now it's I'm finding evidence to prove all of the joy and the goodness and the massive amount of opportunity here, and that's completely changed my ability to transition.
That's so great. And I think one of the hardest things about a transition when you start to feel that fear of the unknown or the unfamiliarity of everything around you is you tend to look back on, we all do. I mean, in general, I think naturally we look back on where we were before and we can kind of identify the safety that we had established in that environment before. And it can feel like we've stepped away from that which was keeping us safe. I know when I moved from Dallas to North Carolina, it was a lot of unknown, and I felt like I lost a lot of myself because I had tied my identity to a lot of the things around me, to the social recognition that I had in Dallas, to the I want to say like title or the role that I had in Dallas. I felt like I was very like embedded in the community, and I was like known within the groups I was in bodybuilding, and I was known as a bodybuilder, and so I tied my identity to that. And then I left and it was like, oh my God, I don't even how am I don't even know what my worth is. I don't feel very safe. And now I feel like I don't have a sense of worth because I'm in this environment. Literally, no one knows or cares who I am or, what I've done or anything. And I don't really know who I am now because I was defining myself by these past experiences.
Mm.
And so with this transition, I didn't feel as unstable or unsteady because I didn't tie my identity very much into a lot of the aspects of life in North Carolina. But I did still see myself turning to old coping mechanisms. And I think that that's something that we have to give ourselves grace for during a transitional period, understanding that processing everything that's changing requires a lot of energy. And before, when we're in an environment that's really familiar, I feel like if you're walking through a forest, you're not noticing every tree and you're like, oh, that's a tree. Oh, that's a tree. I know like every characteristic of it, and I'm consciously processing what it's going to do or what it's not going to do. You kind of like are able to drown it out because like tree, 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 tree. Like you're not really thinking about it. And I think the same is true when we're in an environment that's really familiar. Like you can pretty much get through your house with your eyes closed and get through your morning routine kind of like, oh, what all have I done? Like it's easy to kind of
Mm.
float around when you're familiar with your environment, but suddenly when you're thrown into a new environment, there's this like hyper vigilance that's required because it's like, I don't know where I'm going. I don't know any of these people. I don't know if this area is safe. I don't know where the grocery store is. I don't know how the grocery store is laid out. They don't have bags at the grocery store. Like, how do I get through the apartment? Um, and that can be exciting. Like, I think that can be the engaging part of, say, like traveling. People love to travel and go to a new place because it's engaging all of your senses. But
Mhm.
it's overwhelming sometimes too, especially when it's somewhere where you're supposed to live and just pick up, our work schedule and our life schedule and our relationship and go and drop it in this new environment. And it's like, whoa, everything's new. And like work takes a lot of work. Our relationship takes a lot of work. My self-discipline and my ability to like use proper coping skills, all that takes a lot of energy. And that was a lot easier to sustain in an environment where I wasn't having to really pay attention to the environment. And now I'm in this new place and everything is new. And I just want to like revert to those things that are my default, which aren't always like the healthiest and most sustainable things for me.
Yeah, and I wanna say something first before you answer this question that I have of what are those coping mechanisms that you found yourself into, and what are you doing about them now? How did you address them? What I wanna say first before that is your point to you talked about it a little bit differently when we were talking yesterday, and I kinda just wanna point that out because I thought the way that you worded it resonated so deeply with me. It's when you're on a specific diet and you change one thing, that diet is like the familiar environment. If you change one thing about it, you can identify really easily what it is that caused the disruption in your digestion. Whereas if you change the whole plan, like we did, essentially changing your entire environment, there isn't that easy way of identifying what it is that's causing the disruption in your digestion. So I just really loved that. And I found in regards to coping mechanisms with this transition, I definitely have my routines that I brought with me, which we can talk about that later. But what I realized also was in my coping mechanisms, because of this new environment, I was actually able to see my coping mechanisms so much more clearly. And I don't know if this happened for you too, but I was able to see that the coping mechanism of excessive exercise and training, also this micromanagement of food, was actually causing me to disconnect with my intuition so much more, which is the thing that I call upon for decision making and for grounding and for being clear in my identity of a daughter of Christ, right? Like my identity is in my spirituality and my the only way for me to connect my mind and body is connecting my intuition and getting still and getting grounded. So my excessive exercise and my focus on food was actually taking me out of any sort of more time spent in my rootedness, in my stillness, in my meditation, in my connectedness to my intuition. So, what I love so much about the newness of this transition was that it highlighted so much more of my coping mechanisms. So, I think that's just like a plus of newness and of transition is as much as those might come back up, they're also almost illuminated so much more because you're not able to just fall into that same routine like for me going to the gym in the morning and being on my normal food routine, it wasn't as easy for me to identify I was falling back into those patterns, but here it was. And so I just wanted like for me to then adjust what I was doing to really allow for what I needed, which is more connection to my intuition and prioritizing meditation. That helped me get to this new place that I just talked about prior in terms of my mindset. So with all of that said, I really want to know your coping mechanisms that you fell back into and what you if you that was easy for you to identify and how you went about adjusting those coping mechanisms.
Yeah, I'm gonna insert something as well first though. Um, when I have a client who's going through like something stressful, usually something at work. I have a couple of clients who are like accountants. I have clients who get really busy at the end of the month. And one thing I always have to like reiterate to them is like when your work gets busy, we need to look at what other areas can give. So if you're in a dieting phase and you're really busy and you're doing cardio, this may be a week where we pull back on your training intensity or add in additional rest days or deload because your body can only handle so much stress and it doesn't really matter where the stress is coming from. Like, obviously, if all of your stress is on your body all the time, that's going to be an issue for your body. Like, we handle stress better when it's distributed across a couple different areas. But still, we can only really handle so much and continue to thrive. We can survive through a lot, but like actually thriving, which to me means not just leaning on coping mechanisms any coping mechanisms, usually our default ones not being the ones that serve us the best, but leaning on those tools that actually support us to be our best self, which I think are more than coping mechanisms. They're the ability for us to thrive in a situation, not just cope and survive in it. And I think it's important when you're in a period of transition to have that grace with yourself and understand like now's the time when you need to get the support that you need. You need to be sleeping as much as you need to be. Like maybe this isn't the time to be taking on extra clients. Like that's something I've had to tell myself. Or like, maybe this isn't the week where I need to be trying to film extra YouTube videos. Like because I have so much my body and my mind are trying to process right now that when I keep trying to overload or I take the same level of work that I expected in an environment that was super familiar and drop it into this environment, it's so much more stressful because again, there's so much more I'm attending to physically and emotionally each day, such that my workload ends up being way more if I try to do the same amount within this initial period of being here. So I think it's really important to understand that, um, and to give yourself grace for that because there is going to be that period of like, I need to adjust my new baseline and figure out what this looks like, reset the logbook kind of like, all right, let's see where I'm at now in this new environment, in this new gym, when I'm starting this new job, now that have a baby at home, like now that I'm married, like think about that. You can't just like drop your old life into this. You need to take the things with you that have helped you, but give
Mhm.
yourself some grace and understand which areas may need to give a little bit so that you can pour into creating stability in this new area. So with that said, I would say I did not do that exactly because I was feeling really good about this transition. And I think that's another thing to note. Even if you're feeling really good, does not mean that it isn't still stressful. Just like with training, I can love training, but training is still a massive stressor on my body, and I have to honor that. So this was stressful, and I didn't really perceive it as such because to me, this was all very positive, but there can still be positive stress that's a little bit overwhelming. And I didn't really realize that I was slipping into some of my old coping mechanisms, which for me tends to be mostly around like caffeine. And especially with driving, I really tried to keep that in check a lot, but I gave myself like the leeway of like, okay, I can have like 1 to 2 caffeinated drinks a day, but I was just sitting in the car doing that, right? So then we get here and it's kind of continuing. And I find that I'm having a couple of caffeinated drinks in a day, having up to like 400 milligrams of caffeine a day, which for me is just way too much. And I'm like, wow, my anxiety is really bad. I can't imagine why, but I'm like unwilling to address this coping mechanism that I'm using. So that was one of the main ones that came up for me. And it was I think, like you said, it can illuminate the reality of the situation of like, oh, hey, I'm turning to coping mechanisms. And when we start to look at that as an indicator that maybe I'm overwhelmed, maybe something else needs to give, maybe I'm not addressing something, maybe I'm out of alignment in some area, maybe I'm really run down and I'm looking for some alternative source of energy and I really just need to rest. Like, we need to look at the why behind the thing, which we've talked about before, and that was something that I feel like you really called me to do within the past week, as I just kind of confided in you as to how difficult it's been for me to step away from caffeine, feeling like it was something that I really needed, especially during this transition.
That's so good. Um, was there anything that you found yourself implementing in your mindset, or when you felt not necessarily triggered, but tempted to engage back in it? I find that when we're in coping mechanisms that are familiar, there tends to be sometimes a manipulative voice that makes it okay sometimes in our minds, where we can almost right the wrong that we know internally isn't right. And if you had that come up, was there something that you changed, or is there a mindset or a thought or a affirmation or something that you call upon that helps you to recenter back into your goals and what you know you need to do.
Yeah, I definitely have that voice inside, my, like, teenager voice, like, "Well, everyone else does it." And, like, especially with caffeine because it's, like, the drug that no one wants to admit is a drug, and it's everywhere, right? So, it's like, well, everyone else does it, and it helps my performance, and I feel like it makes me a lot busier like, busier, right? It helps make me a lot more productive at work.
Yeah.
But I can tell that it exacerbates my anxiety, and I can tell that the sources that I use, usually like an energy drink, they're not great for my digestion. My acid reflux has been really persistent despite like all my changes with food to support my digestion, and I just kind of felt dissonant. Like, all right, the next thing I would do would be to go to a GI doctor, but, like, what am I gonna tell them? That I'm drinking 2 energy drinks a day? Like, to me, that's so obvious, that's where I need to start, and that's where I would tell my clients, and just having that conversation with you where I was, like, just admitting where I felt like I wasn't living in integrity, that helped, but it didn't really get me to that point of commitment, and so I fought with this back and forth, and just like the artificial sweetener thing, it was like, well, maybe if I set a reward, and I'm like, that doesn't even feel strong enough because honestly, from day to day, like, I wake up in the morning and I can't imagine why the day wouldn't be better with an energy drink. Like, even if I'm like, this might kick in my acid reflux, I'm like, well, I won't feel it until later. So it doesn't even feel like I'm experiencing the consequences right away. I feel like what really shifted for me was we had this conversation the other night where we were talking about our responsibility in life to take care of ourselves. And I said that I feel like part of our responsibility to take care of ourselves lies in that when we are aligned with what our spirit, our intuition, which is what I believe the Holy Spirit speaks to us through, when we're aligned with what our intuition is calling us to do, we have more power. And when we have more power, we not only find more joy in our own life, but we have more power to influence others positively. So, our responsibility to take care of ourselves and do what we know we need to do, and when I say should, like what we feel internally like we should be doing to honor ourselves,
Mhm.
we can then show up more effectively for other people in our lives. And I think when I realized, like, I'm going to be a better partner if I don't have as much anxiety. Like, I'm gonna be a better friend if I can be a little bit calmer and more centered in a conversation. I'm gonna be a better mentor if I'm practicing what I preach.
Mhm.
I'm gonna be better to everyone around me if I'm living in alignment with what I'm saying that I believe and I'm managing my anxiety, because that's a big problem for me. And if I'm allowing that to take over my life and I'm actively participating in something that is exacerbating that anxiety, like to me, that is not being obedient in the small things. And I feel like God is calling me to more. I feel like He's calling me to a higher responsibility. Like I'm supposed to be doing more. And I haven't quite figured out what it is yet or where it's going. And I get so caught up in that sometimes I lose sight of the fact that He's calling me to be obedient in some like little things in my life. And until I can demonstrate that, I'm not going to be expected to handle more responsibility. Till I can be a good steward of what I have, and that includes my body first and foremost, I shouldn't I shouldn't be given any more responsibility. So I think recognizing that the other night was amazing. To me, that really solidified a deeper why, and I feel like I'm in a spot, and I know it's day 3, but even being able to take a couple of days off caffeine and feeling like I'm not worried about it. I've been really tired, but I feel like strong in it, and I feel very convicted, like, this is exactly what I'm supposed to be doing, and I'm headed towards being a better me. I feel like that really solidified the why and has overcome some of those voices that try to pop in and say, "Well, everyone's doing it," and I'm like, "Well, I've got a bigger purpose," or like,
Yeah.
"Well, you'll feel more productive," and I'm like, "I'm not made to be productive. Like, I'm made to be present. I'm made to experience God in the present moment. I'm made to be present with the people who enter my life and not be so far ahead of everything that's happening right now because I'm so caught up in my anxiety that's dragging me into this potential future that I'm missing out on what's going on right now.
Yeah, and something I want to add is the idea that, anxiety is really rooted in wanting to be prepared and planned for the future out of this fear of potentially what could happen for some people. For a couple of my clients, the anxiousness is like wanting to just be certain and wanting to make sure that you have what you need for future circumstances. And something that I've been learning, and my anxiety is definitely a little bit different. My anxiousness will only show up when it comes to my health. Um, for the most part, my tendency to be present is actually more prominent. But what I struggle with is being open while being present, my heart being open. And the reason why I wanted to talk about that piece on in addition to what you just shared is for you to be open to hearing what is being called, what you're being called to, what God's saying to you, connecting to your intuition. And same for me, it requires a level of openness and being open also. And what I mean by open is like your heart has to be open to newness. It has to be open to change. It has to be open to letting go of caffeine or letting go of cardio or letting go of training or letting go of an old life that was good. Like being open is also going to be extremely painful. And I think, I truly believe that through pain is where purpose is created. And that is something that I share as my mission statement with life coaching. But I didn't understand fully until this trip the pain of letting go and the experience of having an open heart and what that does for clarity, how there's that ambivalent pain, but there's also that peace at the same time in that process. And so I think for people who are listening who struggle a little bit with anxiousness out of fear of future pain, it's renewing your thoughts on what pain can do for you. And also knowing that pain is not this thing that you can avoid. It's like a constant. And so really transforming your definition of pain and allowing yourself to fully feel this pain. That's one of the tools in this book is when you allow yourself to feel the pain fully and you open up, you actually do allow that thing to die. And then you get to ascend out of that through the light that's shining into your spirit, through that open heart, through your intuition, and actually come up what he calls the vortex. You essentially ascend into the newness of life that comes after you accept fully, like you're saying, you accepted that you were not living in integrity. You accepted that you weren't living in alignment. And what that did for you was it actually ended up letting you separate from it and actually make the change because you let that thing die. You opened yourself up enough to experience the pain of knowing you weren't living in integrity, admitting it, and then letting yourself ascend into this higher realm where God's now able to give you that purpose you're talking about, give you more responsibility. Same for me. I felt like the second I opened up my heart and was willing to experience pain on a really full body, deep level, that was when I was able to actually let go and grow into this newness, create space for the new, and allow myself to be held with more purpose and walk with more purpose and have a deeper connection to my intuition. So just wanted to you bring that tool in there because I think it's really hard what you're doing. It's super challenging to let go of something that can seem so normalized, especially by the world. And it's a super courageous decision. But I just also saw how much pain was in that. And it to me, it's so important that that pain is processed like the way that you processed it to allow for purpose to be born into it. Because a lot of the times people are thinking avoiding pain is the way to go. And I same for me, like that survival brain you're talking about, that survival mind is literally programmed to try to avoid pain and dying and suffering. But that is the way in which thriving actually happens is through the death of something that no longer serves us or embracing the pain fully, allowing yourself to fully process it so you're not carrying around past trauma that you avoided into your future self, your future life.
Definitely. I think the benefit, no, the value in a season is that it is a season, and a season requires an end. And just like every good story has an ending, like, I think it's so important that we embrace that. Like, have you ever watched a show where they'll just never let it die and it just goes on and on, and there's like 8 seasons and you're like, what are they even doing anymore? Like, this is the same thing on repeat at some point. Like, that is a pet peeve for me. Or like, this is the 4th movie in this, in this series. Like, we're just gonna keep adding them because the first one was such a hit. But there's something so powerful about like, wow, the ending of that movie was like, and yeah, it leaves you wanting more, but that's when your imagination gets to explode. And it's the same in our lives. When we close a chapter of a season, there's a lot that has to die with that, but we get to hold on to everything that we learned in that season, everything that we discovered about ourselves, the ways that we grew through that season, that can come with us. We get to choose, every single day parts of us are dying, and we get to choose what lives based on what we water, and what we water is like what we focus on. And there's going to be seasonal transitions like this where a lot will die all at once, but like there's a lot of beauty in that because it gives us an opportunity to let go of a lot of things that aren't serving us, and a lot of things are going to rear their head during this phase because we're super vulnerable. But that's good when you start to look at it like, oh man, like this is going to be a heck of a lot of growth. Like, let me make sure, got a support system. I'm, meditating, I'm sleeping enough, I'm eating. Like, are you checking your boxes to just take care of you as a person? Because it's going to be a hard time. But man, you're going to grow like crazy if you're willing to let go of those things. But that requires that you solidify an identity that is rooted in something that is beyond the temporal. And that is, to me, that like you said earlier, that spiritual connection. Like, my identity lies in God, and He is beyond space and time. So when I'm moving through these temporal transitional phases here on earth, and it can feel like my world's being shattered, I remember like the real parts of me, the true me is rooted in something that can't be shattered by the world. But there's a lot of parts of me that don't have to come with me now, and I need to let those go. So I think when you come into a new season, understand that it's going to be painful. You're going to be shedding. Like, there's going to be parts of you that you have to let go. But in that, you get an opportunity, a unique opportunity that you really only find in periods of transition, to get to kind of redefine yourself, take on that creativity that comes from closing the old and letting go of stagnant energy, and like lean into the newness that this opportunity is creating. Since we're in a new environment, for me, that gives me an opportunity to kind of solidify a new routine. Yeah, in January, a big part of my routine was adding in writing, and that was like huge for me to be able to add that in. Well, that's like in my routine now. So now I'm like, all right, what else do I need? I'm like, I gotta serve. I need a service opportunity. So I like applied for a couple different things and like got approved to serve at the Humane Society. I'm like, awesome, that's gonna be part of my routine here. And all those things are now gonna be shaping me as a person. So it's also a lot of opportunity that comes with the pain. And that's why I think we can learn to embrace it more, understanding that the pain won't kill us. It will scare the crap out of us, but that's good, because fear to me indicates like where we need to go, where we have an opportunity to grow.
I think what we can end on is just a clarification that you told me the other day from Jordan Peterson's podcast, the difference between being selfish and, I don't know, selfless was the other word that you spoke about, but it was essentially how, because you're talking a lot about doing the things that for you to allow you to show up for your best self. And sometimes what we think is best for us isn't actually serving the people around us. And so having that clarity of what, yeah, go ahead.
It was the difference between selfish and like self-care. So when
Yeah.
does self-care like branch into selfishness?
So why don't you just explain that? Because you talked a ton about self-care, but I know that there are times where in the past where I've thought self-care is to make sure I'm getting my training in and not letting anybody's call who calls me then to come in and interrupt my workout because this is going to help me get to this place of peace. Like, so I think it's like that. What is the difference? How is that? Where is it that you actually do have self care meshing really well with also serving the people around you without it getting too far into the selfishness or even entering into selfishness?
Mm, yeah, and I think, the way he explained it was when you're being selfish, we usually identify with parts of ourselves that are not constant. They're more like temporary whims. So I suddenly feel like I kind of want to like have a drink or whatever. I want to, ignore this call because I'd really just rather play video games. But there are like deeper parts of ourselves that like stick with us over a longer period of time. And self-care can be when we're fostering those deeper parts of ourselves, like our higher self. Like I would say those parts of ourselves that are rooted in maybe our higher meaning. So like for me, that are rooted in God, my relationship with God and who I am as a child of God. When I'm taking the steps to foster those parts of me, I will then show up more effectively for people around me. And that's where self care is a very positive thing. When it branches into the selfishness, it's when we're doing things for maybe our own pleasure that do not allow us to show up better for other people. They may even detract for that. They may negatively influence those around us. So I think that's something that it's hard to define piece by piece. And I think it can look differently per person because I know a lot of people who pour a lot into their lives and their jobs and their kids. I have a lot of clients who are parents and I love working with them, but they have a hard time a lot of times doing something for them. So working out can feel kind of selfish when like, I've got 4 kids and I work a full-time job and I got to cook for the family and I got to get everyone to school. And it's like, hey, this is for you and your body. Because if you're taking care of your body, you're setting an example for your kids. And if you're taking care of your body, you're going to feel better and have more energy and be able to show up for them and maybe live longer and get to spend more of your life with them. So you can kind of trace back how those decisions will positively impact those around you. Whereas other people, myself included, there's been times when like my training comes above all else. If I'm home for Christmas, like I don't care. It's Christmas Eve, I'm going to the gym and like everyone else can just like go do what they want. And I'm, not going to be around family for those 2 hours and not necessarily rush my time in the gym. Like take it. And I think there's an intention behind that that's different. It isn't like, okay, I need to go do this to center, or I'm willing to be flexible. Like I can make this thing happen. Like maybe I go train in the morning when not everyone's awake and I still get that in, and that helps me show up and be more effective for everyone. But I'm not sacrificing that time with people that is also a good thing in my life. And also really what I'm here for to like be a light to those around me. But that inflexibility to me reflects more of that like selfishness and when that line of self care may cross that boundary.
Yeah, that's good. I just think in times of transition, it's really hard to clarify because it can be overwhelming. So I appreciate you just clarifying that for everybody.
Yeah. And I think that's something that requires a lot of reflection. And we've talked a lot about like journaling and meditating, but you got to figure out what's true for you and not that there's like different ultimate universal truths for everyone, but there's going to be things that you need that you might not be giving yourself and you need to lean into a little bit more. I feel like universally, a lot of us could use a lot more stillness. So something like that, do you have a practice in your day that's getting you still? But also, do you have something in your life that's calling you to serve others and connect with others? Because one thing about a time of transition is I feel like it can cause us to isolate a lot. So making sure that you are still getting out there and connecting with others, I feel like can help you clarify what practices in your life, maybe pulling you away from expanding your light towards kind of contracting out of the fear or discomfort of a new season.
Definitely. Definitely.
Awesome. Um, if what would you say is like one of the staples of your routine now that has really helped you stay grounded now that you're in a more positive place with this transition?
I implemented doing a midday devotional here. I realize I'm super grounded in the morning. I don't struggle in the morning at all, and I don't struggle at night either. At night, I do my devotional at night, and so I had gotten into that pattern morning and night, but it was like almost throughout the day as things started coming into my immediate environment and started my thoughts started getting a little bit more active. I would lose sight of Jesus. I would lose sight of prioritizing my mission around glorifying him and really just keeping my focus, like you said, watering that seed instead of letting my focus kind of diminish into all these other seeds that definitely don't need to be watered here. So adding in that midday devotional and making sure that that was around a session of stillness and self check-in. So it's like my little period of time. I put my phone on do not disturb. I make sure that I'm focused solely on that and I'm just in it. And I'm very open from my mindset and open in my heart to receiving what God has to share for me in that moment. And it helps me just reset. It helps me just remember that I have a responsibility to shine my light. And it's up to me to choose if I'm going to choose joy in this situation or if I'm going to choose to be kind of a pissant and just, walking around with, well, this is just so hard and why. So it's not that it's like constantly like that in my mind, but sometimes the pain can be overwhelming. But again, that's always, always, always providing me an opportunity to make a choice on how I'm going to view this and what lens I'm going to choose. So having that midday devotional just kept me really grounded throughout the day and remembering to use my tools, remembering to still get still, even if I have a list of to dos. It's prioritizing what I know grounds me so well in the morning at night and knowing that in the midday, that's where I struggle most. Well, what is it that grounds me? Okay, great. Let me just add in another devotional. And it helps to do my morning one with you because there's that reflective notes period at the end, and this middle one I do with Caroline. And so the middle one in the day is still it's a responsibility to another person, like that's my accountability buddy. And so I implemented that on purpose with somebody who had, a very clear understanding of why I was doing it and can hold me accountable to ensuring I'm getting grounded in the middle of the day. Do you have one? I would love to know yours.
That's so great. I don't have one, and I have been wanting to incorporate meditating, and I do feel very called to do it midday because I feel the same. Like I feel good about my morning routine. I'm all about that. Like have a morning routine, have a way to wind down at night, whatever that looks like. Just be consistent. But that midday can be really hard, and that's when my mind is like basically just attached to my computer. And
Hmm.
so getting away from that and like finding a way to center again, just come back to myself is really helpful. I don't have a consistent way that I'm doing that yet, but I found that just in general, like stepping away from my computer, looking out the window for a while, there's lots of dogs around here. So sometimes I just like look at all the dogs around here in the dog park or like my friend told me about a grounding technique where you look around the room and go through the alphabet of things that you see, starting from A and finding one for every letter. And if you can't find something of that letter, then you describe something. So you would be like an exuberant plant or something. So that would be a way to do it. But that's helpful too because it just brings me back to the present moment and gets me away from just that like productivity mindset that I get caught up in so much.
Awesome. I think that's a great way to wrap it up.
Well, thank you guys for watching and or listening. This was an awesome series on transitioning, and I think it was helpful for us to talk about as well as we process our own journey across the country and into this new chapter of life. Would love to connect and hear about your own experience with transition. And if you're struggling through your own or need some guidance, definitely feel free to reach out to us. Our emails are below. And next week, we will be kicking off our new series that I'm super stoked about on relationships. So stay tuned. If you guys have any questions, we will be doing another Q&A for this one, not this week, but the following week. So stay tuned on Instagram on our stories for that. So you can be involved, ask your questions, and we'll be tackling those on one of the episodes in this series. So be sure to like, subscribe, comment below. Thank you guys for watching, and we will catch you next time.